Good afternoon. So thank you for the opportunity to come speak to you today. It's been a number of years since I've been in the UK, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come home to my friends in government. One of the bullet items mentioned public expectations, so I'm going to try to put that on the table, public expectations. I helped create mn.gov, the portal for the state of Minnesota, way back in 1995. And I was government by day and citizen by night. I also created a project then called Minnesota E-Democracy. It was the world's very first election information website, a nonpartisan site that had information on candidates, but also created a place where people in Minnesota could talk about political issues. And by accident, we discovered when the election was over, people kept talking. In fact, I recall helping get the Department of Revenue, our tax department online, help them with web space. They were so excited, and they were saying, people can now pay their taxes online. And I said, where's the button where you can then say, here's how I want my taxes to be spent? And that could be right. I knew it was probably my time to begin moving out of government about 1998 because I was really a democracy guy, right? I wanted more transparent, open government, the trend was really services first, but now it's 20 years later, and it's democracy later, right? And so now we're beginning to see a growth of interest. But I spent a number of years, about a decade, speaking around the world, working with governments that really wanted to use the internet to engage the public in some way. And there's obviously some exciting trends, but what I'm going to try to do is open us up to some new things that are emerging. Let me first start with actually a sad story. This is the mighty Mississippi River. It has its headwaters in Minnesota. We had a lot of rain this summer, and record rainfall, and it was quite a torrent. And sadly, this guy named Joe, who was at my house about 3 months ago for fondue with his wife, their children go to our school, he went missing. And Katie posted on Facebook, my husband's missing, right? Pretty dramatic moment. And she turned to the medium where she could reach out to people. So we connected. We used the internet to help organize and gather people for a search along the river. We had a sense that he was by the river. His van was found, his work van was found near the river. And when someone goes missing and there's no evidence of foul play, the police and the public authorities can only do so much. And so it was on us to really organize it. It was when we found some evidence along the shore that the police showed up with their van, right, and began to investigate. Today we don't know really what happened to Joe, but no body has been found. But what emerged out of this was digital engagement based on necessity, right? Based on necessity. So I mentioned Facebook, a way to connect with friends and family. Texting was huge among our friends. Google Docs, so behind the scenes a group of us created a shared, in the cloud, structure where we could share lists of contacts, people who would help with the search, where we could gather information. I searched online many map sources thinking, well, maybe we can help out with the search and get some really nice maps of the shoreline. Found 10 sources, lots of PDF files. Finally, through open data, available then through OpenStreetMaps, sourcing government data, very detailed maps. The commercial maps will look pretty, but they don't really allow you to create nice atlas and print. But with a tool via OpenStreetMap, we were able to create printable maps. We used SignUpGenius to organize people to help with the search, to help with meals for the family. Within minutes, we used Weebly, actually like in 3 hours, a couple hours, we created a website before a community fundraiser. We used PayPal at the last minute and got many donations with the community event. Other friends used YouTube to tell the story. And of course, email was behind the scenes. So the reason I'm telling the story is about how do we as individuals use this medium when we have to out of necessity. Barry Wellman and Lee Braney wrote a book on, they use the phrase network individualism. So we're in the center, right? Everything we do online, we're in the center. Our friends and family are most connected to us. We join online groups in our communities of interest, sometimes they're geographically based. We use tools like LinkedIn to connect with our professional peers. So where is the public, broader public? Where are government and other entities? They're out a ways in terms of how we tend to experience this medium. What I'd like to say, though, from this experience that really hit home, we really are an engagement generation. And we're using these new tools of our times, and they're digital. Now, a lot of times you hear about, in the news, hey, Hong Kong, millions in the rally, you see tweets and photos and people talking very legitimately about how the net is bringing a global audience to various protests. You hear about the Arab Spring and its role with telling the story, or saying, come to the square, go home, come back, go home. In my view, this is not everyday democracy. Okay, it's not everyday democracy. I come from Minnesota, it's a very stable democracy. And people participate in more traditional ways. And so the question I have to say is, when it comes to this digital revolution, how do we scale this more to local public and social life? The Hyde Park, the community meeting, maybe a little less of those two and more about the planning meeting or the round table, or thinking more about how this engages with people's social lives online. What are the online models related to that? So there are 5 key trends I'm going to talk about in the next 5 minutes. And I'll go right in. Fundamentally, this is about people. It's about people. And I'm having a flashback here when I started speaking about democracy in the net. I talked to governments and political parties and media, and everyone basically said, well, we're the government and here's our information, right? And everyone kind of came from their perspective. And it was really only us as citizens that began to experience what all these other sectors were putting online, more or less one way. So we had our Minnesota Politics Discussion Forum. Well, today now we have Facebook and Twitter, right? We have widespread public spaces where we gather all this information and we do stuff with, right? And so trying to take that citizen perspective is key. Agenda setting. While a lot of folks are really interested in influencing decision making, they talk about greater deliberation. The number one thing that I see emerging in a practical political sense is that people can use these tools to set agendas, whether it be for their neighborhood or for their city. Now I happen to be from the state that elected this guy, our governor, if you recall, Jesse Ventura. He's a pro wrestler. He didn't look like that on election day, but he came in as an independent, right? And so I was meeting with his staff, and they were flooded with email, because he kind of represented this new sort of independent middle, if you will. So lots of people came out. And I said, well, why don't you put in your replies, go to the Minnesota Politics Forum and have your say, essentially. Because I said, wouldn't you rather have people talking to each other rather than sending you email all the time? And they're like, oh, yeah, it's a good idea. This is back in '98. To finish this story off, because of this big dramatic moment where this third party came from nowhere to win the governorship, I also posted a joke on our Minneapolis online town hall. And I simply said, are squirrels in such a high density ever considered a public health risk? Which is a bit of a joke, right? The forum exploded. Why? Because it related to people's lives. Everyone has a squirrel story. Oh, this squirrel got caught in my house and tore up my, this. Well, about a week later, I get a call from the St. Paul Pioneer Press, the major newspaper. We're doing a story on squirrels. We understand you're an expert. Media source, right? And then another week later, I get another call. We're with animal control. We understand you're having trouble with squirrels. How can we help you? The government called me. And so whether now thinking about Facebook or whatever medium people are connecting in, it's about the who's who, right? It's not what you say on email, it's who reads what you say, right? And so as more and more people become connected, particularly at the local level on up, these spaces matter. And then it circulates out into the media. It allows people to set more agendas. But we got a big problem in this whole space, loudest voices. A lot of this technology is oriented toward the people who are most upset and angry replying, right? And it's a problem. I don't have a solution for this yet. But I think the key thing to note is that a lot of people use these loud voices, particularly on online news commenting using aliases, right? A lot of the local spaces tend to be tied to media sites, which have often the lowest quality threshold, if you will, in terms of engagement. And it's used to dismiss all the voices, or dismiss the use of the net in any way for local engagement. So I believe we can think a lot more about proactively, particularly sort of thinking about .gov for all, if you will. How do we reach new voices? How do we reach more people? So this is a sort of, well, it came out of France, this diagram. The Open Government Directive in the US had three main themes, transparency, participation, and collaboration. What they found out was that open data is the easy part, right? But all along the line here, it talks about educating citizens, consulting, deliberating, and I still believe to this day, most of this activity is still build that they will come. And for the most part, that just doesn't work, particularly when you're trying to do more engagement with institutions of governance rather than just services. So another thing I found out was that there's some data out there, not well known. This is from 2011. They surveyed 60,000 people across the U.S. It was on page 161 of this report, and I'm giving it more exposure, but long story short, people who make over 50K a year are twice as likely to use e-government services, tax forms and the like. Now, there is a UK study out of the OII, Oxford Internet Institute, where they asked about 7 different things, and 65% of net users, that's of all people in this survey, have done at least one of those things. So you may be a little bit higher in terms of access, but the key thing is that we need to pay a lot more attention to who's not using our services, because in theory, if they save us money, let's reach out to those or at least are more likely but still not a user, and how do we, again, analyzing data. So one of the things that we did with eDemocracy is we had a significant grant to do neighborhood level connecting areas between 5 and 20,000 residents. I hired a team that spoke 10 different languages over 2 summers. We went door to door with our website, essentially, right? Signing people up to participate in online spaces, because one of the key things that they found in other surveys, Pew Internet and American Life Project, is a huge gap in being asked to participate based on income, education, and race. And so we basically said, let's ask. And we found that a very effective starting point. All right, to finish up here, big trend, real emerging, I call them Facebook native politicians. What you tend to see in a lot of places is a lot of interest in Twitter. My view is that folks in Twitter, you can kind of see it there as a soapbox, right? People are messaging the media, and people who use Twitter a lot want to be basically visible political players. And how are they using Facebook differently? They're using Facebook to engage more of their local constituents. It's much more sort of like, I want to climb the ladder, and I just want to connect with people who are everyday. That's what I see emerging. And what happened in Minneapolis is we had an election in 2013. We have 13 council members. We went from a boomer-dominated council to millennials and Gen Xers basically dominating. All the newcomers, average age 33. A lot of 32-year-olds, one 29-year-old. And the average age of those who returned is still a relatively young 50. So what's happened is not that they're using Facebook pages. I mean, Facebook pages don't work anymore for the most part. You have to pay Facebook to get those who like your page to actually see it. It's a form of advertising. But these politicians, these counselors, are in the middle. They're individuals. They can speak their own mind. They don't have to get permission as a civil servant to say something. They may have issues with their political party if they're a little too outspoken. But in general, they can talk. And so I call it friending for office, right? And just like they used to door knock, now they're friending for office. And what we're seeing that was completely unexpected in my view is that they actually use this medium to ask questions. When they actually want input on something, they say, hey, should we change the direction of these two-way streets? And you'll have extensive dialogue. So watch that. It's really exciting, it's really interesting, but also ask the question, who hasn't yet friended their local counselor? And I think we need get-friendly campaigns so that we have a greater diversity of our constituents that say we want to do it. So to finish up, open data and civic tech, it's a real trend, it's a big deal. This diagram is circulating around, it kind of helps you see there's a lot of data out there, there's a little chunk of government data. And there are those that say, just give me the data and we will work for stickers. And they call it civic hacking or civic coding. You're familiar with My Society and other types of projects basically are trying to do different efforts around the world where in local communities. I met with Open Data Manchester last night at the pub and chatted with them about how they want to use government data to create apps and do creative things. It's a real trend. There's also civic tech ecology. The Knight Foundation documented almost $700 million in investment for technology for good. Yep. And so here you had a whole bunch of activity, not just government. So lastly, come on in. I have an open government group on Facebook, and I'm trying to get people connected. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Next speaker to extend the topic is Mandeep Hothi. Is that correct, Mandeep? Mandeep is Senior Program Manager for the Innovation Lab at Nesta, the innovation agency. Mandeep.
Great, thanks very much. I don't have any slides. I'll try and talk for about 5 minutes or so. So for those of you who don't know, Nesta is the UK's innovation foundation with a mission to bring great ideas to life by working with people and organisations. I work within the lab at Nesta, which is deeply interested in innovation in public services. We do that largely through grant making, through something called challenge prizes, which uses incentives and rewards to try and unlock innovation. And we also run our own in-house innovation programs. I work on several things within Nesta, largely with a digital angle. So I work in a fund a £14.5 million fund which we run in collaboration with the Cabinet Office called the Centre for Social Action Innovation Fund, and I lead the digital strand in that. I also work on a programme called Code for Europe, and it relates to the civic technology movement that Stephen just referred to. That's really what I'm going to talk about today. Code for Europe is based on a programme out of America called Code for America, which is looking at how you can place civic coders within local government to try and develop new software that helps deliver better services for citizens. And we, within Code for Europe, are working across several cities, developing reusable open source civic software to help solve local civic challenges. This is a model which has spread around the world. It's a global movement of organisations, cities and government and activists who are all trying to use technology to improve government and civic engagement. The movement's beginning to come together under a name and a banner called Code for All, which involves countries from Mexico, such as Mexico, Japan, Australia, Ireland, Germany, Pakistan, tons of countries